modified, so it's only right-handed. Again, that's a problem. And actually, all the similar problems are there, as in the scenario of proteins first, and yeah. So to get to just RNA, and actually an RNA world, at least if there has ever been an RNA world, it has to be admitted it cannot be the beginning stage. It's a very developed stage. If it ever was, how to get to that developed stage is a problem in and of itself, an unanswered problem. And then to get from the RNA state to the protein DNA RNA complex that exists nowadays, also there has actually been no real convincing theory or models of how that actually could happen. So it's just to make it a little brief here. Here are some couple of quotes from, they're called two of the world's leading researchers in the origin of life, are named Leslie Orton and Gerald Joyce. They are probably the topmost experts on the origin of life and the RNA world. They're the most quoted in this field. They're the ones who have published most peer-reviewed papers on this topic. And they wrote in 2002 in a book actually called the RNA World Second Edition. It says here they say, if the building blocks of RNA were available in the prebiotic environment, prebiotic means before life arose, if these combine to form polynucleotides, that's RNA molecules, and if some of these polynucleotides started propagating themselves, making copies of themselves, then the RNA world might have arisen as a first form of life on Earth. But according to our present knowledge on prebiotic chemistry, this is unlikely that this ever happens. And actually, they are formed their words very moderate, the conclusions they kind of understate their conclusions. Actually, they say it's unlikely. They're not saying impossible. They're just, but actually it's highly unlikely. And they had actually 3 years before, Joyce has said that actually this scenario would have been something like a near miracle for it to happen. It's not at all likely. It was something miracle. And the definition of miracle is something that should not happen, but it happens anyway. That's a kind of a miracle. It goes against the laws of nature. So such a scenario with RNAs arising and starting making copies of themselves, is actually would have been miraculous in the early Earth. Another quote from 2007, which you also see here, is that it says, that's Robert Shapiro. He's a professor in chemistry from the University of New York. And in 2007, he also gave the same conclusion. He said that, it just says that the probability for this to happen is so small that if it's that either the theories which are still accepting this RNA scenario, they kind of accept that the living, the world, the chemical world has like an instinct, a natural drive to become alive, which is not really, it's a property that chemicals don't have instincts and drives to become something, but they kind of assume that chemicals have this drive to become lifelike, or other things just happen by chance, which also is not really a scientific idea. And we discussed that. I gave an example of that in a previous lecture. We were making some calculations on chance, and chance is just out of the question. Even if I think we don't have to get into it here. Chance is not something. It's not a possibility when you talk about such complex things happening just by chance. Again, it's like, of course, we can give the example again with a house being sampled just by chance. When you have a pile of bricks, you put dynamite under the bricks and blow it up in the air, and just by chance, the ready house is there. You can move into an already ready house. It can happen by chance, but the probability for this to happen is so infinitely small that we can safely exclude that, but we don't even to consider that possibility. So it's something similar, like the probabilities are so infinitely small. So what's interesting is that, so this is Robert Shapiro, you see here, criticizing the RNA world. So what does that mean? So why does he criticize? Does he have a better proposal? Yeah, he's a proponent of another theory. There are different theories in the origin of life. And he has a theory that the metabolism came first, which means it's a theory. Well, actually, take the other theory. The theories we've discussed so far is that proteins came first, or RNA became first, and they call actually genetic molecules. But Shapiro is a proponent of an idea that another complete different assemblage of similar molecules, they arose first and created metabolic cycles. And let's see if I can explain what that's, as you know, I mean, living organisms are characterized. One thing that characterizes living organisms is metabolism, which means that matter is being replaced. It's a cycle of, like we eat and we excrete matter, eat and excrete matter, and constantly it's a constant replacement of matter. Metabolism, is that the correct explanation of metabolism? So that's very characteristic for living organisms. Here, I'm not able right now to explain in detail an example of a metabolic cycle. And what's explained here is also quite vague. Now that's also typical of these theories, and we see some of the critique of these theories actually are that they are too vague. It sounds somewhat nice. One example is, one theory is that you have at a near, for example, some chemical compounds called an A, B, C, and D. They might establish a catalytic circle or cycle. Okay. A catalytic cycle. I'll explain what that means now. Catalytic means a catalyst is if you have a chemical reaction where A combines with B and it creates a certain product called C. And then if you have D as a catalyst, if D is there in the mixture, is present, then A and B reacts faster and creates more C faster in the presence of D, but D itself is not part of the reaction, it just speeds up another chemical reaction. That's a catalyst. Yeah. Shapiro, someone proposes that you might have, for instance, near where there's some warm springs and some water constantly running through with different kinds of nutrients. There you can have the chemicals A, B, C and D. And A is a catalyst for B, which means that when A is there, more B is generated. B is a catalyst for C. That means when there's more B, then there will be more C generated. And C is a catalyst for D, which means more D will be generated. And D is a catalyst for A, which means when D is there, more A is generated. And if such a cycle is there, then you actually have a catalytic cycle, because they all increase each other. Ultimately, there gets more A. That also means there will be more B, there will be more C, there will be more D, again more A, like that. That's what something like that they propose. And such a cycle could at one point actually become a lifelike if it can be captured, such a cycle, and of course captured within a cell, like a cell wall, the more protected like that. That could become a lifelike process. Something like that. It's very vague. And again, my presentation is somewhat inadequate or lacking. Professional chemist, he wouldn't accept my presentation. But this kind, you get the idea. That's kind of some scenario that Shapiro and others are proposing. And Shapiro thinks this, mainly because of the difficulty of all the other scenarios. You think this is the scenario that must have happened. And but again, other scientists, they are actually criticizing this scenario, such as Leslie Orgel. Leslie Orgel he died in 2007. I said he was one of the most eminent researchers in the origin of life in the 20th century. And in his last paper was actually a critique of this metabolic theory. And this paper was actually published after his death. So probably he didn't come. He was working on it. He didn't quite complete it, but it was published after his death, as it was. And basically, what's up there now on the wall is a little more detailed critique of that. But in the end, he concluded. In one sense, he said actually this scenario could work. If pigs could fly, then this would also work. Or he says, but solutions which given by the inherence of genetic or metabolic evolutionary scenarios, which depends on if pigs could fly, hypothetical chemistry are most likely not helpful. Something like that he wrote. So he was again saying, he's also calling these scenarios and metabolic cycles of fact-free science. It's a science, fact-free science. Science without facts. Nice, so nice words, some good theory. There's no facts. We have no observations. We have no experiments. There's no facts. And it's based on some hypothetical scenarios, which if they were true, it might work. Just like if pigs could fly, all kinds of things would be possible. But pigs don't fly. That's the only problem.
Just don't
And don't try to throw them off a cliff to see if they could.
No.
It's a waste of time.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be so pleased.
Actually, if you really follow this, this field of ordinal life, mainly what really springs in your eyes is that there are different theories, there are different scenarios, there are different proponents of the different theories of the ordinal life. But what it seems mainly where they're really good is at criticizing the other theories, not establishing their own, but they're really good at pointing out the faults in the other theories and the other scenarios. So if you actually step, a little and just look outside, you can see they're all being criticized and they're all being debunked and shown to be not tenable, any of them actually.
By each other.
Huh?
By each other.
By each other, yeah.
That's very efficient.
So I can demonstrate how you're full of faults, and you can demonstrate I'm full of faults, and someone else will just point out, yes, you're full of faults already. So that's kind of the situation. There's a
What a bunch.
here. There's an article. I just read it. It's from today. It's an article from today. It's in the Times of Israel. On all places. We just page down. I don't know what all these gopis are doing in the Times of Israel, but that's life. And then
It's a catalyst.
but it's definitely a catalyzer for something. Probably selling more copies of Times of Israel, if nothing else. And so here they have this, but Times of Israel has a rabbi called Moshe Averik. He's a far-out character. Of course, he's been a rabbi. He's Jewish, and then he's a great criticizer of evolution and Darwinism and like that. And he's really good, because when Jews they become expert at something, they're really expert. And he's very humorous and sarcastic, and he's just criticizing atheism left and right. And someone just sent me a link to this article yesterday in the Times of Israel, where he's talking precisely about this point about the research into the origin of life, and he called it a demolition derby, basically. If you're English, I think you might know what it means, a demolition derby. I'm not sure exactly, but it's kind of,
Demolition derby is when they have a race with cars, but it's allowed to bump each other.
Yeah, so I thought it was something like that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of moving, all the cars are ultimately exploding, and something like that. Just destruction, So of course it's fun to look at. So, and he says actually that's what this field, scientific field of the research into ordinal life appears like, because they all demolishing the theory of everyone else, and all the theories just being demolished. So he's quoting Robert Shapiro. The last sentence from Shapiro is: the spontaneous appearance of RNA chains on the lifeless Earth would have been a near miracle. Leslie Orgel, and he quotes this again. I have that quote also. He has all picked up this quote about if pigs could fly chemically, and criticize the metabolic theories. Then he's quoting Hubert Yogi, He's a very famous information theorist, you know, in information science used in computer science. He's one of the foremost developers in that. But also he has also spoken on origin of life, because also life is also, you know, is actually also information based. You know, DNA and the codes, it's all information based. So an information theorist, he can also speak on origin of life and chemistry. And he says Cairn Smith, that's another famous researcher like Stanley Miller, trying to discover early scenarios of where spontaneous building blocks arose from natural processes. He says Cairn Smith is grossly mistaken in his hypothesis that the information density in a crystallite is all similar to the information content in DNA. That's something you will find. Some will claim that critics of evolution say that order cannot arise spontaneously. You know, order cannot arise from disorder. And then someone like this Cairn Smith will point out, no, but they can. Just see how crystals form naturally. Isn't it? Crystals form naturally. And a crystal is a very ordered structure, like ice crystals and salt crystals, and there's many kinds of crystals. And actually, they're very, very nicely ordered. So he says it's not true that order cannot arise from disorder. It does so in crystals. But as Yoki says here, the information found in DNA is a completely different kind of order. The information content in the crystal is very low. The information content in DNA is very high. And that we understand that it's actually crystal, yes, it's ordered, but that information content is very low can be illustrated by that. It's simply that you're just repeating. You have a very simple formula for the formation of one crystal, and then you just say, and then repeat, and you just repeat, and then you make bigger and bigger crystals. You understand? So that's actually very simple. The information content is very simple. You can express it in in a few words, and also by or you can formalize it. You can boil it down to how many bits, and it contains. It's actually the information content is very low. But the order found in DNA is a high information. It's extremely complex. Also to explain it is extremely complex. You understand what I mean by so the order found in DNA is a high information content order. It's not a low information content order, so they cannot be compared. And again, Orgel, another quote from Orgel, on theoretical grounds it seems implausible. And then there's here a quote from Fred Hoyle, renowned physicist, astronomer, and mathematician, about the primeval organic soup theory. In short, there's not a shred of evidence that life began in an organic soup here on Earth. Dr. Yoki on the same subject, the entire effort in the primeval soup paradigm is self-deception. Remember, this just quote from scientists. Here, Stanley Miller is being mentioned. So it's just mentioned that his original discovery and the theory connected with it was just hype, basically. Günther Wechterhausen, famous German origin and life researcher, he says that approach, proteins first, is a blind alley. So here they're just criticizing the Miller experiment. Here is a quote from Scientific American by a senior writer at Scientific American. The origin of life is a science writer's dream. It abounds with exotic sciences and exotic theories which are never entirely abandoned or accepted, but merely go in and out of fashion. in another article he put it more bluntly, scientists don't have a clue how life began. That's a simple fact. And then he talks about simple, it gets into the word simple, and they talk about simple organisms and simple life and so on. And he points out actually that doesn't exist. It's something you might look for simple life. It doesn't exist. There is no such thing as simple life forms. It's only, everything is just astoundingly complex and fantastic. And it's just as the bacteria is astoundingly complex, and complexes of bacteria are even more astoundingly complex. There's no such thing as simple life. Let's see here. Let's quote from Michael Denton. He says, in fact, contrary to the popular notion, there is no such thing as simple or primitive life. There's only awesomely, staggering, complex and sophisticated living organisms, and other living organisms that are even more awesomely and staggeringly complex and sophisticated. And we haven't even talked about the most advanced, digitally encoded information storage, retrieval and translation system known to mankind, the DNA-based genetic system which operates in every living thing, including bacteria. And then he quotes another famous scientist, Eugene Koonin, in the book from 2011. He writes, the origin of life is one of the hardest problems in all of science. Origin of life research has evolved into a lively, interdisciplinary field, but other scientists often view it with skepticism and even derision. This attitude is understandable and, in a sense, perhaps justified, given the dirty, rarely mentioned secret. Despite many interesting results to its credit, when judged by the straightforward criterion of reaching, or even approaching, the ultimate goal, the origin of life field is a failure. We still do not have even a plausible, coherent model, let alone a validated scenario for the emergence of life on Earth. Certainly, this is due not to a lack of experimental and theoretical effort, but to the extraordinary intrinsic difficulty and complexity of the problem. A succession of exceedingly unlikely steps is essential for the origin of life. These make the final outcome seem almost like a miracle. Koonin is one of the really top guys today in the world of chemistry.
Is it the rabbi we saw in the beginning who's writing all this?
He's quoting. He's simply quoting these scientists found the quotes, and of course he's a rabbi who's writing.
Okay. Yeah, he's quoting, but now he's not quoting anymore, or he's still quoting here?
That was quoting. What I just read was quote.
Okay.
Quote by Koonin, and those who scientists within the field know Koonin. He's really one in the top of, in the world of biochemistry today. So, and that's his book from 2011. He says it seems like it's almost been a miracle. And another, Paul Davies, famous physicist and origin life expert. What you might get the impression from what I've written, not only that the origin life is virtually impossible, but that life itself is